The scream of the train whistle pierced through the Texas afternoon, as Beatrice Finley pressed her tear-dampened handkerchief against her cheeks, watching the landscape of Bandera County roll past the smudged window with growing apprehension. The year was 1881, and everything she had known in Philadelphia lay behind her now, including the grave of her brother who had been her only family, and the debts that had threatened to swallow her whole after his passing. She had answered an advertisement in the newspaper for a mail-order bride with desperation clawing at her throat, and now here she was, traveling toward a complete stranger who had paid her way and promised her security. The countryside was so different from the cobblestone streets she knew, all vast expanses of scrubland dotted with twisted oak trees and rocky hills that seemed to stretch endlessly under the unforgiving sun. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman of 22 years with auburn hair, pinned beneath a modest traveling hat, green eyes that had seen too much sorrow in recent months, and a face that might have been pretty if it were not drawn with worry. The black morning dress she wore was nearly threadbare at the hem, testament to her circumstances. She clutched a worn carpetbag containing everything she owned in the world, which amounted to 3 dresses, a few undergarments, her mother's silver locket, and the letters from a man named Jacob Mitchell, who promised her a home and protection in exchange for becoming his wife. The train began to slow, and Beatrice felt her stomach clench with nerves. She wiped at her eyes again, trying to compose herself, but fresh tears kept threatening to spill over. What if he took one look at her and found her wanting? What if the reality of her situation, of what she had agreed to, proved too much for either of them? The conductor called out Bandera as the station came into view, a simple wooden structure with a covered platform where a handful of people waited in the shade. As the train shuddered to a halt with a great hiss of steam and grinding of brakes, Beatrice stood on unsteady legs. She gripped her carpetbag tightly and made her way down the narrow aisle, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The heat hit her like a physical wall when she stepped out onto the platform, so different from the mild spring weather she had left behind. The sun was merciless here, and she blinked against its brightness as she searched the faces of strangers for someone who might be searching for her. She saw him almost immediately, standing apart from the others with his hat in his hands. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair and a lean build that spoke of hard work. He wore dusty work clothes, a simple shirt and trousers held up by suspenders, and boots that had seen better days. But it was his face that caught her attention, the way his eyes were scanning the platform with what looked like nervous anticipation. When their gazes met, something in his expression shifted, softened, and then he smiled. It was not a practiced smile or a forced one. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, and held such genuine warmth and relief that Beatrice felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. He walked toward her with long, purposeful strides, and as he drew closer, she could see the kindness in his brown eyes, the slight dimple in his left cheek, the way his whole face seemed to light up despite the dust and grime of frontier life. "Miss Finley." His voice was deep and gentle, with a slight Texas drawl that was unfamiliar but not unpleasant. "I am Jacob Mitchell. I hope your journey was not too difficult." Beatrice tried to speak, but her throat felt tight with emotion. She managed a small nod, and then to her mortification, fresh tears began to spill down her cheeks. She had not meant to cry in front of him, had wanted to appear strong and capable, but the weeks of grief and fear and uncertainty were too much to contain. Jacob's smile faded into an expression of concern, and he reached out slowly, as if afraid of startling her, and gently touched her elbow. "Let us get you out of this sun," he said quietly. "You must be exhausted and overwhelmed. Come, my wagon is just over here." He did not seem angry or disappointed by her tears. He simply guided her carefully across the dusty street to where a modest buckboard wagon waited, hitched to two sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the seat with a steady hand and placed her carpetbag in the back before climbing up beside her. As they began to move through the small town, Beatrice tried to regain her composure, dabbing at her face with her handkerchief. "I apologize," she finally managed to say, her voice rough. "I did not mean to greet you in such a state." Jacob glanced at her, and that smile returned, smaller now but no less genuine. "No need to apologize. I imagine you have been through a great deal and I am a stranger to you besides. It would be more surprising if you were not nervous or upset." His understanding surprised her. In his letters, he had seemed kind but practical, explaining that he needed a wife to help with his ranch and to share the burden of frontier life. She had expected someone harder, perhaps, more demanding. "You are very understanding," she said softly. "My mother always told me that kindness costs nothing and means everything," he replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "Besides, I have been as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs waiting for that train. I kept worrying you might take one look at Bandera and decide to turn right back around." Despite everything, Beatrice felt a small smile tug at her lips. "It is very different from Philadelphia." "I imagine so," Jacob said. "This is rough country, Miss Finley. I will not lie to you about that. Life out here is hard work from sunup to sundown, and there are challenges we do not have back east. But it is also beautiful in its own way, and there is a freedom here that you cannot find in a big city." As they rode, Beatrice began to look around with more attention. Bandera was small, just a main street with a few shops, a general store, a saloon, a church, and scattered houses. Beyond the town, the landscape opened up into rolling hills covered in oak and cedar, with rocky outcroppings jutting up from the earth. It was wild and untamed, but Jacob was right that there was a certain beauty to it. "How far is your ranch?" she asked. "About 5 miles outside of town," he replied. "It is not much, but it is mine. I have about 200 acres, run some cattle and horses. I built the house myself 3 years ago when I first settled here. It is just 2 rooms right now, but I have been planning to add on. If you stay, if you decide this life suits you, we can make it bigger together." Beatrice noticed his careful wording. "If I stay." Jacob was quiet for a moment, then pulled the wagon to a stop under the shade of a large oak tree. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious but still kind. "Miss Finley, I know the circumstances that brought you here were not what anyone would choose. I know you answered my advertisement because you needed a way out of a difficult situation. I will not hold you to anything if, after you have had some time to rest and see what life here is like, you decide it is not for you. I will give you enough money to go back east or to wherever you wish to go. I will not trap you in a marriage you do not want." Beatrice stared at him, stunned. She had signed a contract of sorts, had accepted his money for her train ticket. She had assumed he would expect her to fulfill her end of the bargain regardless of how she felt. "I do not understand. You paid for me to come all this way." "I did," he acknowledged, "and I hope with everything in me that you will choose to stay, that we can build a life together. But I want a partner, Miss Finley, not a prisoner. My mother raised me to respect women, and I will not start my marriage by forcing a woman who is grieving and scared into vows she is not ready to make." The tightness in Beatrice's chest that had been there since she boarded the train in Philadelphia began to ease. She looked at this man, this stranger who was offering her not just an escape but a choice, and felt the first stirrings of hope she had experienced in months. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted quietly. My brother was my only family, and he died 3 months ago from pneumonia. He had debts I did not know about, and creditors came demanding payment. I sold everything we had, but it was not enough. I was about to be thrown out onto the street when I saw your advertisement. Jacob's expression filled with sympathy. I am sorry for your loss. Losing family is one of the hardest things in this world. Did you lose someone? The question came out before Beatrice could stop it, too personal for a first meeting, but Jacob did not seem to mind. My parents 5 years ago, he said. There was a fever that swept through our town in Missouri. They both got sick within days of each other and were gone before the week was out. That is part of why I came to Texas, to start fresh where everything did not remind me of them. I am sorry, Beatrice said, and meant it. They sat in silence for a moment, two people bound by loss and the hope of something better, and then Jacob smiled at her again. We are a pair, are we not? He said gently. Both running from grief and looking for a new beginning. Maybe that is not such a bad foundation to build on. At least we understand each other's pain. Maybe, Beatrice agreed, and this time when she smiled back, it felt a little less forced. They continued on toward the ranch, and Beatrice found herself stealing glances at Jacob as he drove. He had a strong profile, with a straight nose and a determined chin, but there was nothing harsh about him. He pointed out landmarks as they went, showing her the creek where he got water, the neighbor's property line, the best spot to see the sunset. He spoke with pride about his land, but also with a humility that suggested he knew how much work still lay ahead. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Beatrice saw that he had not exaggerated about its modest size. The house was indeed small, built of rough-hewn lumber with a stone chimney and a covered porch that provided some shade. There was a barn nearby, a chicken coop, and several fenced pastures where horses grazed. It was simple and isolated, but it was well maintained, and there was something appealing about its sturdiness. Jacob helped her down from the wagon and carried her carpetbag to the house. Inside, it was dim and cooler than the blazing outdoors. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a wood stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. A doorway led to what she assumed was the bedroom. I know it is not much, Jacob said, setting her bag down carefully. But it is clean and sound. I have been sleeping in the barn the past week, fixing up a space for myself there, so you can have the bedroom. I want you to be comfortable. Beatrice turned to him, surprised again. You have been sleeping in the barn. It would not be proper otherwise, he said simply. Not until we are married, if we are married, and even then, only if you are willing. The respect he showed her was almost overwhelming. Beatrice had expected to arrive and be married immediately, to be expected to fulfill wifely duties whether she wanted to or not. But Jacob was giving her space, time, choice. You are not what I expected, she said honestly. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? He asked, and there was a hint of nervousness in his voice that made him seem more human, less like a stranger. Good, Beatrice said, and saw relief wash over his face. Very good. Over the next several days, they fell into a careful routine. Jacob would wake early and tend to the animals, then come to the house for breakfast that Beatrice prepared. She had always been a capable cook, and she found satisfaction in making meals for someone who appreciated them so clearly. Jacob praised her biscuits, her gravy, her coffee, and it was obvious he meant every word. After breakfast, he would head out to work on the ranch, mending fences, tending cattle, breaking horses. Beatrice would clean the house, tend the small vegetable garden she discovered behind the house, and collect eggs from the chickens. In the evenings, They would sit on the porch together as the brutal heat of the day faded into a more bearable warmth. Jacob would tell her about his day, about the progress he was making, about his plans for the future. Beatrice found herself opening up as well, sharing memories of her childhood in Philadelphia, of her brother who had raised her after their parents died when she was young, of the dreams she had once held for her life. "What did you want to be?" Jacob asked one evening as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "A teacher," Beatrice admitted. "I loved reading and learning, and I wanted to help children discover that same love, but it was not practical. My brother worked in a factory, and I took in sewing to help make ends meet. There was never money for me to get the education I would have needed." Jacob was quiet for a moment, then said, "There are children in Bandera who need teaching. The town has been trying to establish a proper school, but they have not found anyone willing to take it on. If you stayed, maybe that is something you could do." Beatrice looked at him in surprise. "Really? Why not?" he said. "You would be good at it, I can tell. And it would give you something of your own, a purpose beyond just being a rancher's wife. That is important." The fact that he understood that he wanted her to have her own dreams and goals, made Beatrice's heart warm toward him even more. Each day, she found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the sound of his laugh when she said something amusing, to the way his eyes lit up when he talked about something he was passionate about. One afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Beatrice was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a rider galloping toward the house. Jacob emerged from the barn and the rider pulled up short, his horse dancing nervously. "Mitchell," the man said, breathing hard. "We have got trouble. Rustlers hit the Sanderson place last night, made off with near 20 head of cattle. We are forming a group to track them. You coming?" Jacob glanced toward Beatrice, concern evident on his face. "I should not leave Miss Finley alone." "Bring her to town then," the rider said impatiently. "She can stay at the boarding house, but we need every man we can get. These rustlers are getting bolder." Jacob looked torn, but Beatrice made the decision for him. "Go," she said firmly. "I will be fine at the boarding house. This is your livelihood, your community. You have to help." "Are you certain?" Jacob asked, already moving toward the barn to saddle his horse. "I am certain," Beatrice said. "But please be careful." Something in her voice must have conveyed more than just polite concern, because Jacob paused and looked at her intently. "I will be," he promised. "I will come back, Miss Finley. You have my word." Within the hour, Beatrice found herself installed at the boarding house in Bandera, run by a kind older woman named Mrs. Harper, who clucked over her like a mother hen. "Do not you worry, dear," Mrs. Harper said as they watched the group of men ride out of town. "Jacob Mitchell is one of the finest men in this county. He will be just fine." But Beatrice did worry. She paced the small room Mrs. Harper had given her, unable to settle. It surprised her how much she cared, how quickly Jacob had become important to her. She barely knew him, and yet the thought of him riding into danger made her heart clench with fear. The men were gone for 2 days. 2 days during which Beatrice could barely eat or sleep. She helped Mrs. Harper with chores around the boarding house just to keep busy, and the older woman seemed to understand without needing explanation. "You care for him," Mrs. Harper said on the second morning as they kneaded bread dough together. "I think I do," Beatrice admitted quietly. "Is that foolish? I have only known him a week." "Sometimes a week is enough to see someone's heart," Mrs. Harper said wisely. "And Jacob has a good heart. His mother was a dear friend of mine before they passed. She would be so proud of the man he has become." When the men finally rode back into town late on the second day, Beatrice ran out onto the main street without thinking, searching desperately for Jacob among the dusty, weary riders. She spotted him near the back of the group, and relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees went weak. He was dirty and exhausted, with stubble darkening his jaw, but he was whole and unhurt. Jacob saw her standing there, and his entire face transformed. He swung down from his horse and walked toward her, and Beatrice met him halfway. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, not caring that he was filthy or that people were watching. He stiffened in surprise for just a moment, then his arms came around her, holding her close. "I was so worried," Beatrice said against his chest. "I am all right," Jacob murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else, something warmer. "We got the cattle back and ran the rustlers out of the county. It is over." Beatrice pulled back just enough to look up at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. There was more than just friendliness there now, more than just polite interest. There was real feeling, deep and genuine. "I am glad you are safe," she said softly. "I am glad you were here when I got back," Jacob replied, and the way he said it, the warmth and sincerity in his voice, told her everything she needed to know about how he felt. That night, after Jacob had cleaned up and they had returned to the ranch together, they sat on the porch as usual. But something had shifted between them. The careful politeness had given way to something more real, more raw. "I want to stay," Beatrice said into the quiet darkness. "If you still want me to, I want to stay and marry you." Jacob turned to look at her, his expression serious in the lamplight spilling from the house. "Are you certain you do not have to decide now? I told you that you could have time." "I am certain," Beatrice said. "When you rode out with those men, I realized something. I realized that I have come to care for you, Jacob Mitchell, more than I thought possible in such a short time. And I do not want to leave. I want to build a life here with you." Jacob reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. "I have come to care for you too," he said quietly. "More than I ever expected. When I saw you standing on that platform with tears on your cheeks, something in me just wanted to protect you, to make you smile. And every day since, I have fallen a little more. Your laughter, your kindness, the way you hum while you cook, the way you are not afraid of hard work. You are everything I hoped for and more than I deserve." "You deserve everything good in this world," Beatrice said fiercely. "You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever met." Jacob lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then let us marry properly, with the whole town there to witness. Let us start our life together the right way." They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church in Bandera. Beatrice wore a simple dress of pale blue that Mrs. Harper had helped her sew from cloth Jacob had bought at the general store. Jacob wore a new shirt and had trimmed his hair and shaved carefully. The church was full of neighbors and townspeople who had come to welcome Beatrice into their community and to support Jacob. When the preacher asked Jacob if he took Beatrice to be his lawfully wedded wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong. When he asked Beatrice the same, she looked into Jacob's warm brown eyes and said, "I do," with absolute certainty. And when the preacher pronounced them man and wife and told Jacob he could kiss his bride, Jacob cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. The townspeople had organized a small reception at the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Beatrice was overwhelmed by the warmth and welcome she received. These people who had been strangers just weeks ago now embraced her as one of their own. Mrs. Harper cried and hugged her tightly. The shopkeeper's wife welcomed her to the community. Even the gruff blacksmith smiled and wished them well. As evening fell, Jacob and Beatrice rode back to the ranch together as husband and wife. The sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in brilliant colors, and Beatrice thought she had never seen anything so beautiful. When they arrived home, Jacob helped her down from the wagon and then swept her up into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Mitchell," he said softly, setting her down carefully inside. "It feels like home," Beatrice replied, and realized it was true. In just a few short weeks, this place had become home in a way Philadelphia never had, not because of the house or the land, but because of the man standing before her. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, with Jacob showing her the same patience and gentleness he had shown her from the beginning. He took his time, making sure she was comfortable, that she felt safe and cherished. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt right and natural, like two pieces finally fitting together the way they were always meant to. In the months that followed, Beatrice threw herself into making their house a home and building a life in Bandera. She started teaching children in the church hall 3 times a week and found immense satisfaction in seeing young minds light up with learning. She helped Jacob with the ranch, learning to ride horses and even helping to drive cattle when they moved them to new pastures. She made friends among the women in town, joined the church's charitable society, and slowly but surely put down roots in this wild, beautiful place. Jacob proved to be everything she could have hoped for in a husband. He was hardworking and honest, but he also knew how to laugh and play. He surprised her with small gifts, wildflowers picked on his way home from working the far pastures, a hair ribbon from the general store, a book of poetry he had ordered special from San Antonio. He listened when she talked about her day, her dreams, her worries. He held her when she had moments of grief for her lost brother, and he never made her feel weak for missing her old life, even as she built her new one. One evening in late fall, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars come out, Beatrice realized she had not cried herself to sleep in months. The sadness that had weighed her down for so long had lifted, replaced by a contentment she had not known was possible. She leaned against Jacob's shoulder and he put his arm around her, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how much has changed," Beatrice said. "When I stepped off that train with tears on my face, I was so scared and lost. I felt like my life was over, like I would never be happy again. And then you smiled at me and something shifted. You made me believe that maybe things could be all right." Jacob pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You made me believe again too," he said. "After my parents died, I was just going through the motions, working myself into the ground to avoid feeling anything. But you brought light back into my life. You brought laughter and warmth and purpose. You gave me a reason to build instead of just survive." "I love you," Beatrice said, the words coming easily now, though it had taken her weeks to work up the courage to say them the first time. "I love you so much, Jacob Mitchell." "I love you too, Beatrice Mitchell," he replied, "more than I can ever properly express. You are my heart, my home, my whole world." They sat together in the darkness, two souls who had found each other against all odds, and Beatrice sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the advertisement in the newspaper, for the train that brought her to Texas, for the smile of a good man who had made her believe in happiness again. The following spring, Beatrice discovered she was with child. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she finally told Jacob over breakfast one morning, he nearly knocked over his coffee cup in his excitement. He came around the table and pulled her to her feet, spinning her around carefully before setting her down and kissing her soundly. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you pleased?" Beatrice asked, though his reaction had made that abundantly clear. "Pleased? I am overjoyed," Jacob said. "You have already given me so much happiness, and now this. We are going to be a family, Beatrice. A real family." As her pregnancy progressed, Jacob became almost comically protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoon heat, and brought her water constantly to make sure she was drinking enough. Beatrice found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she knew it came from a place of love and concern. The women in town rallied around her, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and preparing her for what was to come. Mrs. Harper was especially helpful, having raised 5 children of her own. She taught Beatrice how to knit and sew baby clothes, and her calm, practical manner helped ease some of Beatrice's anxieties about becoming a mother. Jacob worked tirelessly to prepare for their growing family. He added 2 more rooms onto the house as he had promised, creating a proper bedroom for them and a nursery for the baby. He built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving delicate designs into the headboard. He painted the nursery a cheerful yellow and installed a window that let in the morning sun. In late autumn, when the worst of the Texas heat had passed, Beatrice went into labor. Mrs. Harper and the doctor came to the ranch, and Jacob paced outside like a caged animal while the women tended to his wife. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Beatrice thought she could not bear it any longer. But Mrs. Harper held her hand and encouraged her, and the doctor was skilled and calm, and finally, she heard the loud, angry cry of her newborn baby. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Beatrice's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Beatrice looked down at her son, at his tiny fingers and his shock of dark hair, and felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. When Jacob was allowed to come in a few minutes later, he approached the bed with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. He sat carefully on the edge of the mattress and stared at his son with absolute wonder. "He is perfect," Jacob whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers immediately curled around his father's finger, gripping tight, and Jacob let out a choked laugh. "Look at that. He is already strong." "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names throughout her pregnancy but had never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, Jacob said quietly, "What about James? After your brother?" Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. She had told Jacob so much about James, about how he had sacrificed so much to raise her, how he had worked himself to exhaustion to provide for them. Naming their son after him felt like a way to honor his memory and keep him alive in their family. "James Mitchell," she said softly. "It is perfect." The first few months with baby James were exhausting but wonderful. He was a good baby, generally content unless he was hungry or wet, and he had his father's easy temperament. Jacob proved to be a devoted father, rising in the middle of the night to bring James to Beatrice for feeding, walking him around the house when he was fussy, singing to him in his deep, slightly off-key voice. Beatrice watched her husband become a father and fell even more in love with him. The tenderness he showed their son, the patience he had when James cried for no apparent reason, the pure joy on his face when James smiled for the first time, all of it made her heart swell with love and gratitude. Life settled into a new rhythm. Beatrice still taught occasionally, bringing James with her to the schoolhouse where he would sleep in his basket while she led lessons. Jacob's ranch continued to prosper, and he hired a hand to help with the work so he could spend more time with his family. They made plans for the future, talking about adding more rooms to the house, expanding the herd, maybe having more children. When James was 2 years old, their daughter arrived. Rebecca was born in the spring during a week of gentle rains that turned the countryside green and lush. Her birth was easier than James's had been, and she came into the world with a lusty cry that made the doctor laugh and declare her a fighter. She had Beatrice's auburn hair and green eyes, and from the beginning, she was bold and adventurous, keeping them all on their toes. Jacob doted on both his children equally, teaching James to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and carrying Rebecca everywhere on his shoulders once she was old enough. On Sunday afternoons, they would often ride out as a family to their favorite spot by the creek, where they would picnic and let the children play in the shallow water. These were the moments Beatrice treasured most, watching Jacob show James how to skip stones while Rebecca splashed happily nearby, the Texas sun warm on her face and the sound of her family's laughter in her ears. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Another son, Daniel, arrived 3 years after Rebecca, followed by twin daughters, Sarah and Ruth, 2 years later. Their house expanded accordingly, with Jacob building on new rooms and a larger porch where they could all gather in the evenings. The ranch prospered, and Jacob's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher grew. He was elected to the town council and became a respected voice in community decisions. Beatrice continued teaching, now in a proper schoolhouse that the town had built with funds raised by the community. She had students ranging from 6 to 16, children of ranchers and shopkeepers and craftsmen, all hungry to learn. She loved her work and the difference she could make in young lives, and Jacob never once suggested she should give it up to focus solely on home and family. He understood that she needed both, and he supported her completely. Their children grew strong and healthy, running wild on the ranch under the watchful eyes of their parents. James showed an early aptitude for ranching and would follow his father everywhere, absorbing knowledge about cattle and horses and land management. Rebecca developed a love of books that rivaled her mother's and announced at age 7 that she was going to be a writer when she grew up. Daniel was the quiet one, happiest when working with his hands, building things or fixing broken equipment. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together that neither would have attempted alone. One evening when James was 10 and the twins were 5, Beatrice and Jacob sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. The children were all in bed, the ranch was quiet, and the stars were brilliant overhead. Jacob reached over and took Beatrice's hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "You ever think about that day at the train station?" he asked. "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how lost I felt. I had no idea what I was walking into." "I was terrified too," Jacob confessed. "I kept thinking, what if she hates it here? What if I cannot make her happy? What if I fail her?" Beatrice turned to look at him, this man she had built a life with, who had given her everything she had never dared to hope for. His hair had a few threads of silver now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him. "You have never failed me," she said firmly. "Not once. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love when I thought I would never love again. You saved me, Jacob." "We saved each other," Jacob corrected gently. "I was just existing before you came, Beatrice. You brought meaning to my life. You gave me something to work for, to build for. Every good thing I have is because of you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the soft rustle of wind through the oak trees. "I am glad I got on that train," Beatrice said finally. "I am glad I came to Texas. I am glad I took a chance on a stranger who smiled at me and made me believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. I am glad you did too, Jacob said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our beautiful children, this life we have built together. I would not change a single thing. As the years continued to roll by, their love only deepened. They weathered challenges together, droughts that tested the ranch, illnesses that scared them, the normal trials of raising 5 energetic children. But through it all, they had each other. They had built something solid and true, a partnership based on respect and affection and genuine love. When James turned 18, he announced his intention to stay on the ranch and learn the business from his father. Jacob was thrilled, and the two men began working side by side to expand their operation. Rebecca went away to a women's college in Austin, fulfilling her dream of higher education and making both her parents incredibly proud. Daniel apprenticed with the blacksmith in town, discovering he had a gift for metalwork. The twins were still in school, bright and mischievous and utterly devoted to each other. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised Beatrice with a trip to San Antonio, just the two of them. They had never been away from the children or the ranch for more than a day, and Beatrice protested that they could not just leave. But Jacob had arranged everything, with James perfectly capable of managing things, and Mrs. Harper agreeing to stay at the ranch to help with the younger children. They spent 3 glorious days in the city, staying at a fine hotel, eating in restaurants, attending the theater, and simply enjoying being together without the responsibilities of the ranch and family. On their last evening, as they walked along the river in the soft twilight, Jacob stopped and turned to face Beatrice. "I wanted to give you something," he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. "I know I am not always good with words, but I wanted you to know how much these 20 years have meant to me." Beatrice unwrapped the package carefully and gasped when she saw what was inside. It was a gold locket, delicate and beautiful, with an intricate pattern engraved on the front. She opened it and found a tiny photograph inside, a picture of the two of them with all 5 children, taken just a few months earlier when a traveling photographer had come through Bandera. "Jacob," she breathed, tears filling her eyes. "It is beautiful. You are beautiful," he said softly. "Inside and out. You took a chance on a stranger 20 years ago, and you have given me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you." Beatrice threw her arms around him, not caring that they were on a public street or that people were walking past. "I love you so much," she said against his chest. "Thank you for being exactly who you are. Thank you for making me believe in love, in family, in happiness. Thank you for everything." When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted with chaos. The twins had somehow managed to let half the chickens out of their coop and were chasing them around the yard with help from Daniel, while James stood on the porch shaking his head and Mrs. Harper laughed so hard she had tears running down her face. Rebecca had arrived home from college for a visit and was watching the spectacle with amusement. Beatrice looked at the scene, at her children and her home and the land she had come to love, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This was her life now, this beautiful, chaotic, wonderful life that had started with a desperate decision and a train ride into the unknown. Over the years that followed, they watched their children grow into adults and start families of their own. James married a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sweet woman named Anna who loved the land as much as he did. They built a house on the far end of the Mitchell property and began raising their own family. Rebecca married a lawyer she met in Austin and settled there, publishing her first novel to moderate success and working on her second. Daniel married the blacksmith's daughter and took over the business when the old man retired. The twins were courted by half the eligible young men in the county, before finally settling on two brothers from a family who had recently moved to the area. As Beatrice and Jacob grew older, they slowly turned more and more of the ranch operations over to James, content to watch their children and grandchildren thrive. They spent their days in peaceful companionship, still sitting on their porch most evenings, still holding hands like young lovers, still finding new things to talk about and old memories to cherish. On a warm spring evening when Beatrice was 60 and Jacob was 68, they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Their hair was silver now, and their faces lined with age, but their eyes still lit up when they looked at each other. 3 of their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter filling the air. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Beatrice asked. "When you pulled the wagon over under that oak tree?" "I said a lot of things that first day," Jacob replied with a smile. "Which part are you thinking of?" "You said life out here was hard work but beautiful in its own way," Beatrice said. "You said there was a freedom here you could not find in a big city." "I remember," Jacob said. "Did I get it right?" Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural now as it had been for nearly 40 years. "You got it exactly right," she said softly. "This life, this place, this family we built together, it is more beautiful than I ever imagined it could be. And I am free in a way I never was back east, free to be myself, to love fully, to build something meaningful. You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Jacob said, as he always did when she praised him. "I was just a lonely rancher before you came. You made me whole." They watched the sun disappear behind the hills, watched the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Behind them, they could hear Anna calling the grandchildren in for supper, hear James's deep voice responding. The sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived. "I would do it all again," Beatrice said quietly. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. If I could go back to that train platform with tear-stained cheeks and no idea what was waiting for me, I would still get on that train. I would still choose you." Jacob pressed a kiss to her temple, his lips gentle against her skin. "And I would still be standing on that platform, hoping desperately that the woman getting off the train would give me a chance. Hoping she would see past the dust and the rough edges and give me a chance to prove I could make her happy." "You did more than make me happy," Beatrice said, turning to look up at him. "You gave me a reason to believe again. In love, in second chances, in the possibility of building something beautiful out of broken pieces. That smile of yours on that very first day, it changed everything. It made me think that maybe I could be happy again, that maybe my life was not over but just beginning." "It was just beginning," Jacob agreed. "For both of us. That day was the first day of our real lives, the day we started becoming the people we were meant to be." As the stars came out fully and the night settled around them, they remained on the porch, content in each other's presence. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and family and purpose. They had built something lasting, something that would continue on through their children and grandchildren. Inside the house, Anna was putting the children to bed while James checked that all the doors were locked. In Austin, Rebecca was tucking her own children in and reading them a story she had written. In town, Daniel was closing up the smithy for the night, his wife waiting for him at home. At the neighboring ranch, the twins were settling their families for the evening. All of it, every bit of it, had started with a young woman stepping off a train with tears on her cheeks, and a young man with a smile that promised hope and kindness, and a future worth fighting for. They had found each other in the vastness of the Texas frontier, two lost souls looking for something better, and they had built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. Years later, when Beatrice and Jacob were both gone, laid to rest side by side in the cemetery outside Bandera, their children would gather on the porch of the family home and tell stories about their parents. They would talk about their father's endless patience and their mother's quiet strength. They would remember Sunday afternoons by the creek and evening conversations on the porch. They would speak of a love story that started with an advertisement in a newspaper and became the foundation for generations of family. But on this evening they were still together, still building their story. Beatrice squeezed Jacob's hand and he squeezed back, a silent conversation they had perfected over 40 years. The night was peaceful, the ranch was quiet, and they were home. "Come on," Jacob said finally, standing and pulling Beatrice to her feet. "It is getting cold. Let us go inside." "In a minute," Beatrice said, turning to face him fully. She reached up and cupped his weathered face in her hands, looking into his eyes that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "I just want to say it one more time. I love you, Jacob Mitchell. I have loved you since the day you smiled at me on that train platform and made me believe that everything would be all right. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Jacob's eyes grew suspiciously bright, and he pulled her close, holding her as he had held her countless times over the decades. "I love you too, Beatrice Mitchell. You were the answer to a prayer I did not even know how to say. You saved me in ways you will never fully understand. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They stood there in the starlight, two people who had taken a chance on each other and won everything worth having. The wind whispered through the oak trees, carrying the scent of cedar and earth and home. In the distance, a coyote howled and the cattle shifted in their pens. The sounds of Texas, the sounds of the life they had built. Finally, they went inside together, hand in hand as always. They checked on the sleeping grandchildren one last time, banked the fire in the stove, and made their way to the bedroom they had shared for 40 years. As they settled in for the night, Beatrice curled into Jacob's side as naturally as breathing, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Tomorrow, let us ride out to the creek," Jacob murmured sleepily. "Just the two of us. Like we used to before we had all these children and grandchildren running around." "That sounds perfect," Beatrice replied, already half asleep. "We can watch the sunrise." "We can watch the sunrise," Jacob agreed. They drifted off to sleep together, dreaming of tomorrow and grateful for today. Two souls that had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. The story that had started with tears and ended with joy, with a smile that made a broken woman believe in love again, with a love that grew stronger with each passing year. Outside, the Texas stars shone bright over the land they loved, over the home they had built, over the family they had raised. The wind carried their story across the hills and valleys, a testament to the power of second chances, of kindness, of love that endures through all things. And if you listened closely on quiet nights, you could almost hear the echo of their laughter, the sound of their voices in conversation, the whisper of a love story that would be told for generations to come. The ranch continued to thrive under James's capable management, expanding and modernizing while still maintaining the values his parents had instilled. The Mitchell name became synonymous with integrity and hard work throughout Bandera County. And always at the heart of it all was the story of how it began, with a mail-order bride who arrived by train with tear-stained cheeks, and a cowboy whose smile made her believe in happiness again. Their love story became legend in Bandera, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. Young couples would come to the ranch to hear the story from James or one of the other children, hoping that it might bring them luck in their own marriages. The house itself became a symbol of enduring love, standing strong through decades of Texas weather, sheltering generations of family. On the anniversary of Beatrice's arrival every year, the family would gather at the ranch for a celebration. They would cook her favorite foods, tell stories about both Beatrice and Jacob, and toast to the courage it took for a young widow from Philadelphia to board a train heading into the unknown, and to the kindness of a lonely rancher who saw past her tears to the strong, beautiful woman beneath. The locket Jacob had given Beatrice on their 20th anniversary became a family heirloom, passed down through the generations. Each daughter and granddaughter who received it would hear the story of its gifting, of the love it represented, of the promise Jacob had made to love Beatrice more with each passing day. And they would understand that they came from a love that was real and deep and lasting, the kind of love that everyone hopes for but few are lucky enough to find. As the years turned into decades, and the frontier days of Texas faded into memory, the story of Beatrice and Jacob remained. It was a reminder that sometimes the most desperate moments can lead to the greatest joys, that second chances do exist, that love can be found in the most unexpected places. It was a story of courage and kindness, of two people who chose each other every single day and built something beautiful out of that choice. And somewhere in the quiet moments, when the wind blew just right across the Texas hills, you could almost feel their presence, still watching over the land they loved, still holding hands on that old porch, still writing their love story in the stars.